Get down now! Get down now!
I never thought she was bipolar myself. And she didn't act the typical bipolar. It wasn't manic depressive.
I don't have any friends.
Welcome back for the conclusion of this heartbreaking true crime story. I'm your host, ready to examine the final missing pieces surrounding Jessica McCarty's horrific murder of her 3 children. Previously, we learned how Jessica's lifelong mental health struggles eventually drove her to stab her daughter Lacey, age 7, son Philip, age 6, and infant Christopher Jr. Her boyfriend and father of the baby, also named Christopher, came home to find a bloodbath with all 3 children dead or dying from their injuries. Jessica readily confessed but remained eerily detached and unable to articulate her motive. As she was sentenced to life in prison, investigators uncovered Jessica's history of substance abuse, postpartum depression, and other psychiatric disorders, despite her reputation as a warm, loving mum. Christopher provided further insight into Jessica's deteriorating mental state and their relationship tensions in the lead-up to the tragedy. Financial struggles and jealousy over Christopher's female colleague Brandy created growing instability in Jessica's fragile psyche. Her rambling letter left at the scene hinted she may have seen murder as the only way to spare her children from Christopher abandoning them. But many questions still linger over what ultimately caused Jessica to carry out this unfathomable act. Today, we complete the story by examining the missing red flags and unheeded warning signs that could have altered this family's tragic destiny. What disturbing clues were overlooked on Jessica's path from struggling mum to child killer? Are there lessons that could prevent another unthinkable crime? Join us now as we search for elusive answers. Our journey starts with a closer look at Jessica herself and the years shaping her into a profoundly troubled woman. Interviews with those close to her reveal early trauma lingered from a dysfunctional childhood scarred by parental substance abuse. Loneliness plagued Jessica's adolescence as she yearned for stability. She coped through her own drug and alcohol use, foreshadowing long-term addiction issues. Jessica dreamed of the day she'd have a family that gave her the love she never had. That wish came true at age 20 when she married her high school sweetheart Philip and soon had a baby girl named Lacey. Motherhood initially brought Jessica joy and purpose, but when postpartum hormones destabilized her already delicate psyche, she spiraled into severe depression and experienced dark visions of harming her child. Philip recalls her confessing these frightening thoughts, but neither understood the gravity of postpartum mental illness at the time. Philip worked constantly to provide for their growing family, as Jessica later gave birth to a son, also named Philip. Her second pregnancy descended into full-blown postpartum psychosis requiring psychiatric hospitalization. Years later, a similar pattern emerged after daughter Lacey's birth, when Jessica entered a new relationship with Christopher. He recounts how she sank into depression and voiced chilling threats to hurt the children if they cried and disrupted her peace. Here the puzzle pieces begin clicking together. Jessica's untreated postpartum mental illness created an unhealthy foundation for her evolving role as a mother. Negative thought patterns became entrenched, planting seeds for later violence. Professional help at these critical times may have altered Jessica's downward trajectory, but resources were lacking. Philip was oblivious to the gravity of her illness. Christopher accepted her threatening words as empty venting. Her pleas for help went unrecognized until far too late. Financial hardship added more fuel to the fire after Jessica's split from Philip. She lacked consistent work history or career skills to adequately provide for 3 young children. Jessica grew increasingly desperate and resentful, feeling helpless to create the stable home she'd always idealized. Christopher attempted to fill the gap, but tensions mounted over money and other pressures, exacting a toll on Jessica's fragile mental health. Her friendships narrowed as she became more withdrawn and obsessed with her children and boyfriend as sole sources of comfort. Isolation and perceived abandonment brewed into a toxic cocktail inside her declining mind. Untreated addiction issues also likely contributed to Jessica's deteriorating state. Though supposedly sober for years, the lure of drugs and alcohol emerged at times of high stress. During arguments with Christopher, she was even accused of hiding liquor around the house. Substance abuse can prove a highly combustible ingredient when mixed with pre-existing mental illness. This combination ignited into flame when Christopher's friendship with co-worker Brandy sparked misunderstandings and jealousy in the final weeks of Jessica's unraveling psyche. She harassed Brandy relentlessly with threatening messages, despite no evidence of an actual affair. Jessica's brother described volatile arguments around this same period, regarding long-held family resentments. He witnessed her become frighteningly enraged to a degree that concerned him. In hindsight, these were glaring red flags. Something was terribly wrong. But in the moment, the risk went unrecognized. Examining Jessica's final letter again offers the best insight into her twisted motives. She speaks of intense love for her children, while also insisting death was better than living in a broken home. Between the lines, we find our missing motive. In her corrupted thinking, Jessica perceived herself backed into a corner as Christopher prepared to leave her. She imagined him creating a new family with Brandy, abandoning Lacey, Philip, and baby Christopher as reminders of their failed relationship. Completely disconnected from reality, Jessica catastrophized that the children would suffer a lifetime of misery being raised by a single poor mother. In her mind, their doomed fate was already sealed. Jessica longed to spare them further harm, which she could only envision through death. Of course, these fears existed solely in Jessica's delusions, but in an uncontrolled state of psychosis, she failed to see beyond the walls of her deteriorating inner world. She fixated on murder as a mercy killing, tragically misguided by untreated mental illness. Sadly, this could have been avoided if the depth of Jessica's crisis was recognized in time. The pieces were all there: an impoverished, isolated mother with addiction issues and severe psychiatric disorders triggered by postpartum psychosis after each child's birth. Her frightening thoughts of harming her children warranted immediate intervention. Instead, Jessica's suffering went overlooked at multiple critical junctions on the path to destruction. Her untreated mental illness grew into a ticking time bomb inside her broken mind. When triggered by the perfect storm of stressors, it finally detonated in a violent burst that consumed everything she held dear. When psychiatric disorders or troubling thoughts arise, swift action is needed. Inpatient treatment, medication management, and ongoing counseling could have quieted the turmoil in Jessica's mind before it reached a devastating crescendo. Could her family have been more attuned to recognizing symptoms of declining mental health? Should her caregivers have communicated more effectively? Might law enforcement have uncovered her instability sooner? Perhaps in a perfect world. But unfair as it may seem, we cannot avoid the truth that everyone here was damaged and let down by systems bigger than themselves. Jessica's loved ones were also victims of a collective failure, driven by lack of mental health resources and awareness. For now, we close the book on piecing together this painful true crime story that shattered so many lives. May the three innocent souls lost rest in peace while their surviving loved ones find healing. And may their memories spur progress for a future no longer haunted by this heartbreaking tragedy's painful lessons. Thank you for joining me on this difficult yet crucial journey of making sense from tragedy. By engaging with stories like this, together we are building a more just and merciful world. Hit like and subscribe to Crime Matrix for more crime stories. Stay safe out there and see you next time.